Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. Wherever Ali Khamanei may be hiding nowadays, he must surely be wondering what President Trump's next move is and pondering the survival of himself personally, as well as the regime he has headed since 1989. Whether just talking or attacking, Trump virtually has a free hand vis-a-vis the Islamic Republic, limited only by his own priorities, either domestic or foreign, with the latter including the mild response last June by both Russia and China with regard to the American Operation Midnight Hammer. Is the Washington-Tehran relationship basically immune to the strategic power competition affecting other global conflicts? Joining us to analyze this matter include retired Colonel Dr. Eran Lerman, formerly an Israeli Deputy National Security Advisor, currently a Vice President of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. It's great to have you with us, sir.
In these uncertain times, yes.
Uncertain indeed. Also joining us from the West Coast in the United States is Professor Russell Berman, formerly a Senior Advisor at the U.S. Policy Planning Staff at the State Department, that is. Currently the director of the Middle East and Islamic World Working Group at Hoover Institution at Stanford University. It's a pleasure to have you with us as well, sir.
Good to see you, Jonathan.
It's a pleasure seeing you always, Russell. And last but certainly not least, our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, set the framework for us.
You probably remember, Jonathan, as to our guests, that it was a mere 2 years ago when the U.S. administration, at that time under President Biden, with Secretary Blinken leading, started pushing Israel to think about the day after. They meant Gaza, but the same can be said about Iran. Here we are, the day before President Trump's decision whether to give the go-ahead or not, but presumably something will happen vis-a-vis Iran. But how will they come out of it? What is the goal, the purpose? And because of that, it is interesting that the other world powers, such as Russia and China, are not involved. We do see some input by regional powers, such as Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and obviously Israel. But apparently, even though Russia and China do have supply relations with Iran, we don't see them acting to forestall an American attack. So the absence of action is as interesting as action itself.
Indeed. Well, the U.S. military's Central Command Commander Admiral Bradford Cooper visited Israel on Sunday, during the course of which he held a lengthy meeting, a one-on-one meeting with his Israeli counterpart, IDF Chief of General Staff, Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir, during the course of which they did discuss, according to a number of reports, the importance of defending the State of Israel in the event that the Ayatollah regime miscalculates and opts to launch ballistic missiles in the direction of the Jewish state. That, of course, does raise questions, Professor Berman, since the last time an American CENTCOM commander visited was prior, or at least prior to an American attack, was merely 4 days prior to the Midnight Hammer attack on Iran's nuclear infrastructure, which could maybe spell what is about to take place in Iran. Of course, the matter of timing is only known to President Trump himself and maybe a select few in his surrounding. But what can you tell us about that, and to what degree is this going to have severe implications, irrespective of the decision-making at this point in time, but severe implications to the complexities revolving strategic power competition during today's day and age?
Jonathan, we're all really in the fog of war here, compounded, of course, by President Trump's predisposition to be unpredictable. You remember how much he criticized President Biden for President Biden signaling what he would and would not do in the case of a Russian invasion of Ukraine. So our discussion today can play out various options, consider various aspects, but none of us here can say what will happen. I'm reluctant to extrapolate too much from the previous CENTCOM visit to Jerusalem and say that therefore we're four days away from something or other in the Middle East. What are some of the frames we can consider? One is there's a lot of international sympathy for the protest movement in Iran that has been subject to horrendous killing campaign by the regime. Is regime change at stake, and what would the day after be? A separate question is what this means for regional security, particularly for Israel, the likely target of an Iranian response, although the Gulf states also could be targets. And thirdly, what does this mean for American foreign policy? American foreign policy's primary concern has not been regime change, but anti-proliferation. So the whatever action could take place should be evaluated in advance according to those three frames.
Thank you, Professor Berman. Dr. Lerman, you know, when we're looking at the calculus of Ali Larijani, the senior security advisor of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, I can't but consider the variables here. And in the event that Iran does launch an attack, a direct attack against Israel, naturally Israel will respond in force and seal the fate of the Ayatollah regime once and for all. And to take into account that this would include an additional 270 to 300 or even more aircraft, offensive aircraft, in a campaign against the Ayatollah regime, this would establish a paradigm of overwhelming force for the Islamic Republic with any type of hope to survive any type of American attack. Again, within this context, what are the prospects in your mind to the manner in which Iran would indeed reach out into such a dangerous endeavor?
Well, clearly, at the moment, Iran has slipped into the mode of trying to intimidate maybe even the United States, although that's a fantasy in the case of the present administration. But certainly the Arabs in the Gulf, who seem to be actively beseeching Trump to consider what he had in mind, and to see if they can frighten Israel into also trying to latch on to the Americans and hold them down. There is an element. I've always wondered if let's say, self delusion or lying of the Iranians, not only lying to us and to their people, but possibly lying to themselves. The legend that they've created in June is that Israel was hit so hard that it asked the Americans to end the war, that hundreds of Israelis were killed, as if anything of that sort could be hidden in a society like Israel. 31 dead was bad enough, but the Iranians cannot even bring themselves to admit that this is all they have been able to kill with all that they have built over the years for this purpose. So they may be actually lying to themselves, not only to us, and that may be coloring their calculus of what their options may be. At the end of the day, I think they know that their fate hinges on what they do now. And there are indications that they are looking almost desperately for channels to indicate to the Americans that there is a better alternative. This is the reversal of the usual negotiating position, that there is a zone of possible agreement that will render the American partner better alternative to negotiations moot. And the calculus is very complicated because I don't think they fully understand just how deeply the last remnants of their legitimacy were wiped out in the nights of the 7th and 8th of January. True, the Americans did not act, but even if the numbers are nowhere near the 30,000 alleged by Iranian exiles, even if they are a quarter of that, the regime has already lost its legitimacy. It's just a matter of time now. Now, what all of this hinges on, and this is almost, I can refer to this because it's openly discussed. I mean, the Hezbollah has spoken to it, the Iranian leadership has spoken to it, the Israeli sources have spoken to it, is the capacity to actually decapitate the Iranian regime, to hit very hard at the very core of power. This is probably what held Trump's hand 2 weeks ago, because this requires very specific intelligence and very specific operational opportunities. It is not something that you can will yourself to do and then do it. You need certain openings. You need the kind of intelligence that Israel gathered painstakingly over years in order to do this in Lebanon to Hassan Nasrallah at the right moment. And even then, the right moment did not immediately offer itself. And anything short of a decapitation blow by the administration is not necessarily going to achieve the kind of effect that Trump looks for. We've seen his mode of action. He wants something swift, dramatic, and decisive, a midnight hammer, a Maduro. I don't think he wants to find himself or the American people and the U.S. military involved in a prolonged tit for tat with the Iranian regime. So they need something quite decisive. Short of that, and I've been looking at the deployment, I've been comparing it to what was done vis-a-vis Venezuela, and I'm thinking to myself, if Trump has already managed to compare himself to Washington, Jefferson, and Lincoln, why shouldn't he compare himself also in action to John F. Kennedy and simply use the immense armada that he is gathering to lay siege to all Iranian ports and choke off the Iranian economy altogether? The regime hinges on its capacity to somehow try to save a half-dead, already three-quarters dead economy. If you want to look at who won in June, all you have to do is look what happened to the shekel, which is almost going, in the general direction of the dollar, and what happened to the real, which is about 2 million to the dollar right now, and sinking uncontrollably. The Iranian economy is the key to the survival of the regime, and if it can be strangled, its days are numbered.
Well, I think it's a whole of government approach at this point, since the economy is already shattered through and through. But Mr. Oren, I'd like to hear your take on what prerequisites are there for the Iranian regime to survive this type of endeavor.
I'm afraid of overconfidence, of complacency, and assets can become burdens too. And I can remember and tick off several names known to our audience and obviously to our experts. The USS Stark, hit by the Iraqis during the first Gulf War between Iraq and Iran, because Iraq was supposed to be on the side of the angels. The US absorbed this attack, which killed dozens of sailors. It was a mistake. Sheffield, Belgrano.
Operation Praying Mantis?
Yes, but naval assets, Liberty, if you want to go back. The carrier task forces could be vulnerable to missiles, to drones, and it would only take one achievement by the Iranians, even a small one, which of course they will magnify by propaganda, to say on their behalf that they have at least managed a tie with the Americans, no matter how badly they will be beaten. So I hope that the Americans are well protected. They haven't been put to the test yet.
Well, the difference in disparity, power disparity in this context is far beyond what was back in the 80s and 90s and subsequent
All you
periods.
need is one hit.
All you need is one hit, and we do see the Chinese working currently, according to a variety of reports, to airlift dozens of aircraft in the direction of Iran to prepare the Iranians for some type of stand. Professor Berman, is that something that obviously the United States is taking into calculation, but to what degree is it preparing for such a scenario rather than expect the power disparity to be the driving force, so to speak, to success?
Listen, Jonathan, I'm not privy to the specific military calculations that are going on. I'm sure the American side is well aware of this. But I do believe that power disparity is the key determinant in this situation. The question is power disparity to what end? Decapitation of the regime, taking out Khamenei, I'm sure that could take place already. But what comes after? You'd have to take out the next level of the IRGC and the level after that as well. I think President Trump, looking ahead to the midterms, would surely like a clear win in Iran. What he doesn't want is chaos in Iran, which would be a major negative for him. The issue of Chinese support for the Iranian regime is fascinating right now. In the introduction of the segment, it was talked about how the Russians, the Chinese, aren't really getting in the way of the Americans, but it's not quite true. The Chinese are helping with these aircraft. Their Chinese technology has been crucial in shutting down the internet connections with the Iranian people. I think the Chinese must be asking themselves, to what extent can they be helping the Iranians without further souring their relations with the Trump administration?
Absolutely. Well, in that context, Colonel Lerman, you were speaking about following closely the American buildup. The Americans are not the only players in this context. We do see the British scrambling to the region, and other actors, not all have publicly confirmed that. But nonetheless, we might be talking about the USS Abraham Lincoln. Another aircraft carrier strike group is potentially
which
en
has just
route
sailed into the Lincoln has reportedly just sailed into the
over the
CENTCOM
weekend,
AOR.
right? It
Yes.
it already did several hours before the announcement was made. But there are other aircraft carrier strike groups in the region, to include European ones, that are allied and are very keen on seeing the United States prevail here, considering the age of strategic power competition. There are other.
I think they're also quite keen on having the Arab countries of the Gulf appreciate their contribution to
Right.
regional defense, because they would certainly like to be part of the list of beneficiaries once Iran's might is broken.
So, in this context, to what degree do you see here a coalition forming into a more decisive type of operation?
But frankly, we live in a very complicated period of time in terms of coalition building, because the horse and cart driven through NATO by the Greenland crisis, well, it may have subsided somewhat after Rutte's summit with Trump, but it is still left its mark on the coalition. But it is, in a sense, an opportunity for the key European players, certainly for Keir Starmer and the British government and a few others, to sort of redeem the relationship, remind Trump of what he forgot when he spoke about NATO, disparagingly forgetting what they did with and for the Americans on the basis of Article 5 after 9/11. It may be an opportunity to take action, but as I said, it is more fitting, perhaps, for a coalition to participate in the kind of long-range standoff, strangling the Iranian regime, rather than the kind of quarter-hour miracle that Trump may be imagining, or in the style of Midnight Hammer. So we may be looking at a different scenario this time.
Likely, and even possibly, but nonetheless, when we're talking about such a coalition applying pressure and granting initiative to the other side to either capitulate or to lash out, it's not a most comfortable scenario to be in, particularly not to somebody who appreciates the initiative.
Yes, one can go into the American way of war, where it used to be that Americans always absorbed the first blow, they always lost the first fight, and then went on with their enormous industrial base to overpower the enemy. But this is the old war, the industrial age. We have spoken a few minutes ago about the Kennedy example of Cuba, the blockade, but that crisis was finally solved by diplomacy, secret diplomacy, a secret message from Khrushchev to Kennedy. And that means that Khamenei is still holding the ultimate card. He can allow his foreign minister, Arakchi, to call Steve Witkoff and say, yes, we are really willing to reach a compromise on your terms. What will later come out of these negotiations is something else. But this could give President Trump the pretext to go back on his threat to punish the regime.
And the Ayatollah regime is notorious for dragging out baseless negotiations without any substance and applying soft power to pressure democratic regimes to get into or get lured into those type of scenarios. But we're drawing near to the end of the
Their
program.
ability to do so has been hampered by what happened 2 weeks ago.
Absolutely.
I would say that their legitimacy, even with the softest hearted of Europeans, has been completely eroded.
There is much of that, and yet the European institutions are pushing back at any attempt to designate the RGC into the blacklist of terror organizations, and that also speaks volumes for itself. Professor Berman, I'd like to hear your take on this, and also in the context of Russia. Russia obviously doesn't want to see yet another ally fall into shambles. What can you tell us about that?
As far as the Iranian position goes right now, I think it would be insufficient to say for them to say that they're ready to start negotiations. I think there's an obvious route for the regime in Tehran to stay in power, and that would be to concede on the nuclear file, to call up Witkoff or to call up Trump and say, okay, we will stop the nuclear, we will stop the ballistic missiles, you stop the sanctions. That has to be the starting position, and then the regime could stay in place to the extent that it can manage its own population. I don't think the Trump administration is pushing for genuine regime change, just as it did not in Venezuela. To pick up on the European question, at this point, of course, it's important if there are additional forces brought into play, but in the wake of the Greenland crisis, in the wake of the NATO discussion, I think this is probably primarily about an opportunity for the Europeans to remind President Trump that they can do something. They're trying to save face. Remember how quickly the Europeans were to rush a few soldiers to Greenland to defend it. I mean, that was a ridiculous moment in the history of the transatlantic relationship. They could show a degree of seriousness. Final point. One should think through, and perhaps this is a topic for another discussion, Jonathan. Let's say that there is a positive outcome to the Iran crisis. Let's say there is a regime change and it's a good outcome, and Iran stops to being a threat to the region. What's the next chessboard look like? What are the consequences for Saudi Arabia, which all of a sudden has lost its incentive to join the Abraham Accords if the Iranian threat has gone? What are the consequences for Turkey? Does it emerge as the true regional hegemon? And what are then the implications for Israeli security? There are a lot of open questions here about the real next day.
And
Absolutely.
certainly what's happening in Syria right now makes them all the more emphatic.
Dr. Lerman, 40 seconds.
So I think this, it's difficult to predict the collapse of regimes, but I think the foundational elements of the Iranian regime are already tottering, because it's one thing to repress women over hijabs, and it's another to try and save an economy that has completely collapsed, which is beyond their capacity, unless the international community rallies to help them, and this will not happen because they've shed too much blood for this to ever happen. So it's more a question of time, and this present management, the management of this crisis should take this into account. Namely, perhaps there is no need to right now deal a death blow right now, as long as the US sustains its economic and military pressure over time.
Absolutely. Half a sentence.
Question mark. Do China and Russia really mind that the US get bogged down in Iran? Perhaps it's in their interest to have Iran sacrificed.
Well, I don't think it will come to that, considering the state of affairs in Iran, but that's for another discussion altogether. I'd like to thank Professor Berman and Dr. Lerman, as well as Mr. Oren, of course, and to thank you at home. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.
For more of TV7 Israel's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.